Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to, sorry, one moment, please. I have a disturbance. Sorry, we're going to hear some loud noises right now. Can you all still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So welcome to another PUAN webinar. Today we'll be discussing COVID-19 and journalism. For those of you tuning in for the first time, this is a series of webinars they have fortnightly. And so this is about the 13th webinar. And I'm very excited to be here today with these distinguished alumni of various exchange programs. I too participated in an exchange program. I was a Fulbright fellow in Japan years ago. So I'm very excited to hear from our distinguished panelists today. First, I would like them to each introduce themselves, starting with Najia.
Thank you so much, Heather, for having me. And hello, everyone. This is Najia Ashar. I'm a broadcast journalist and working in Pakistani media for almost 2 decades. And I am the founder of GNMI, Global Neighborhood for Media Innovation, an organization that is working in policy research, advocacy, and training of journalists.
Okay, Beenish, can you introduce yourself now, please?
Hello, everyone. My name is Beenish. I'm a journalist, multimedia journalist based in Germany, but I've also worked for many years as a journalist in Pakistan. And I'm also one of the US CFP alumni, and I'm really excited to be here and to discuss this topic of future of journalism, COVID-19 and future of journalism.
Great, thank you. Professor Khan, will you introduce yourself?
Thank you. My name is Altaf Khan, and I teach at the From Christian College University in Lahore. I taught for 28 years at the University of Ashar, and that's pretty much I used to do. I did do a bit of journalism at DW, where Beenish is now. That was back in 2012 and 13. And I went to the US as a Fulbright postdoc fellow in 2008 and 9, and then again as a Glidden visiting professor in 2018. So thank you.
Great, thank you, everyone. So COVID has changed so much for all of us. I know we were just talking before we went live here that most of us are telecommuting now. And that's also applies to our favorite broadcast news journalists. A lot of them are telecommuting and working from home as well. I know in the United States, a lot of the journalists were reporting from home, and viewers were commenting on, the decor in their homes or the books in their bookshelves or whatnot. But it made people feel really comfortable, and it was somewhat reassuring to be able to see the personal side of their favorite broadcast journalists during this otherwise very trying COVID time. How has it been in Pakistan and Germany? Are broadcast journalists working from home there as well? Anyone could jump in. How about Najia?
Should I start? Beenish?
Yeah, sure. Please go ahead.
Okay. So this is obvious now that this pandemic has changed everything, and the way we used to live, the way we used to communicate, the way we used to work. And as you're talking about now, hundreds of millions of people, they are telecommuting around the world. But when it comes to journalism, especially in Pakistan, it was not even imaginable in Pakistan to report from home or to work from home. So this is surprising for all of us that the lockdown started in March in Pakistan, and it's been more than 6 months. And not a single news bulletin was done from home during this period. I thought I have missed something, so I confirmed it with my contacts. Maybe there would be some news bulletins that were telecasted from home, but not a single news bulletin. So newscasters, they were pressurized to work from their news studios, and there was constant fear anxiety, and many news anchors and even the staff who was working on news desk, they were tested positive and went into quarantine, but the work was continued from the newsroom. So at the same time, as you were talking about the US journalist, we saw international journalists around the world. They were working from home, and their kids, even their pets, they were appearing on TV when they were working from their home. So they were interrupting their news bulletins, they were interrupting their reporting, and it was really an amazing sight. It was like at least you are listening to humans. You are watching human beings working in the newsrooms. Now they are working from their homes. We heard it again and again when your kids or your pets show up on a screen. Please do not apologize. Try to incorporate them to your reports. Try to incorporate them to your work. That showed us that we can still smile in the middle of a crisis. Unfortunately, our newscasters, they could not get this opportunity, and I think there were many reasons. Number one, prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, the media industry, it was already in crisis. Thousands of journalists, they lost their jobs, and media outlets didn't have any enough workforce, so there wasn't any experience to work online for the newsroom from home. Neither people do have expertise to tackle technical problems. The resources were not enough to place camera, lighting, equipment, or background to each and every home of the news anchors or their locations. The coordination was very important. I'm talking about the input and output. These are the two important pillars of the newsroom, the input team and the output team. So it was not possible to coordinate between them if you are working from home. However, I saw there were few program anchors, the lucky one, they were given permission to do their shows from home. So I would say, if we see the situation overall, it was not favorable. Everyone in media industry, they were working like frontliners from newsrooms to the field, and still it is going like that.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a shame that not more of the reporters could have worked from home, because I think it also sent a good message to the viewers, like, hey, we need to follow the SOPs and stay home as much as possible and only go out in emergencies and whatnot. Beenish, how was it in Germany? Were they reporting from home in Germany?
So a lot of people in most news organizations in Germany were working from home because when government announced a lockdown, every organization had to completely shut down. But we know news organizations and news websites are, essential services, and it's not possible that news websites shut down or news programs or news is not broadcasted. Even whatever happens, news has to go. So what I saw in Germany was they identified essential staff in every department. So if 2 or 3 essential staff from each department were identified, and these staff members were healthy, were young, were not sick, and also had their own transport, so they were not using public transport. So once they were identified, they were still coming during pandemic, when it was really bad. Even when the situation was bad, nobody like from these essential staff was allowed to work from home. And these essential staff kept changing also. So if two people are working 1 week, then they would stay home the next week, and then 2 other essential staff would come. So of course there was a clear implementation of safety protocols. And I also maybe I was home for 1 week or so, but even I was one of the essential staff, and I also had to come and work. But I did not feel unsafe when I was, coming, because I had my own bike. So I was not using public transport. And when I was in office, we have a really big sized room, and only 2 people were allowed to sit in that room. And also we had to maintain a distance and keep the window open. And we were all given disinfection, material. So we kept cleaning our hands. And there was also disinfection spray was given, which means that if any equipment we are using, for instance, if we have to do video editing and maybe that studio is being used by more than one person, so every person was given, material to disinfect. And I still have these, these things that you can put on. So everyone has, so they were really, I'm really glad that they were really strict measures, and that made me feel safe that, okay, it's a pandemic. It's of course much better to stay at home. But if I'm leaving my comfort of home and safety of home, I'm coming to an organization where at least there is some effort being done, that I don't feel unsafe, because, it's a life-threatening situation. And we journalists have to work in that. And I would also talk, because I was not going out and reporting, so I was going to work because I worked for an online online website. But I know that there were reporters who had to go outside also and report, and they also were given proper equipment, like proper masks, and with organization's name written on it, so people could identify that this person is a journalist. And I saw a lot of press conferences during the pandemic, and I also saw a lot of press conferences in Pakistan, where even now I see, oh my God, nobody's even following social, distancing measures, and nobody's wearing, people are very careless with masks. But I have to compliment and I have to appreciate that at least as much as they could do, they really tried that, they keep the journalists protected. They don't get, they're not infected with the virus. And even when they were outside and they had to report on certain issue or a press conference, there were safety protocols. They were, there was an environment where a journalist would not feel that, oh my God, why am I put into a situation where I could be infected? Yeah.
Thank you. And actually, we got a question. It was directed at Najia, but I think I'm going to give Professor Khan a stab at this one. And it has to do with making the transition from, working in the office in the studio to working at home. And this viewer is asking, were the media here in Pakistan or the media organizations prepared to work from home and to report from home? And Professor Khan, I'm wondering, are you having to change the curriculum and whatnot to teach young journalists how to, do live broadcasts from home and whatnot? Has it really changed your curriculum at your university?
Yeah, one, that nobody in this world was prepared to deal with this situation. It is an unprecedented situation. The transition from work to home is a difficult one. There are many factors involved. As far as the courses were concerned, we were also caught in the middle because the spring semester was going on and the courses were already in, so we were teaching. So we closed in March. So when the government decided to close down, what we did was that we changed the curriculum. So we decided to lessen it first and foremost, since it was distant. And then we also changed the mode of evaluation, for example, like in face-to-face and others. And then we decided to record videos and to send videos to keep a relationship between students and teachers, that because they didn't pay for a virtual classroom or an open university. And beyond that, first and foremost, we did a survey to know how many students have had access to internet and how good was the internet access. So our results showed that we can't have virtual classes. This will disadvantage certain students because we had to maintain equality of opportunity for everyone to evaluate them in the end. So we were recording, we were sending, FC is fortunate that it has a campus management system, like it works on Moodle like Blackboard in the US. So we were able to communicate with students easy. Some teachers used other platforms, like I created a Facebook group where students can comfortably communicate, and I was uploading stuff and everything. As far as journalism is concerned, it was difficult. It is not because, not simply because of the resources. but because of the living conditions that people are in. For example, a journalist in Peshawar, he contracted the virus, and they told him to go and stay at home. Now, there were 11 people living in that 3-room apartment, like an upper story of a 5-marla house, which is normally 3 small rooms. Instead of putting him into a hospital, they said, okay, you go home. And then all 11 people were contracted. And then the chief ministers had to intervene and all these things. I won't say that it's incompetence, but it's just not being prepared to deal with situation at all level. And as far as our courses are concerned, we are moving towards that, because one of the many things that we are looking at is basically how to use scientific data. Data journalism is not very strong in Pakistan. And and the cornerstone of reporting on pandemic is to choose good sources. Like, first and foremost, the very definition of an expert, for example, medical doctors, many medical doctors in Pakistan came out, and also in the US, everywhere in the world, who said, it's not that dangerous as it seems. It's like influenza, it will go away. Where the WHO was just crying hoarse, CDC was saying it. And even at the top of the leadership ladder at a national level, presidents, prime ministers took it lightly. And we have examples like US president, the British prime minister, even the Pakistani prime minister said it's like flu. And messages like those, it was a huge public relation disaster. Because when something comes from the top of the elected chain, people follow that instead of following news. So journalists had to fight the pandemic, and also they had to learn how to report that these not very interesting facts, because these were kind of changing every day. Nobody knew. Follow the UN. Who follows the WHO, for example? Nobody does that, and you have to learn that. And then on the other hand, when people were getting mixed messages, which to report and which not. For example, if the Pakistani prime minister says something which doesn't fit in line with the World Health Organization, what to do? You have to report both. So these were broader problems which still exist, basically. And people are really trying to deal with that.
Yeah, I really appreciate your comment. And that kind of is a perfect segue into what I was going to ask all of you next, which is, outlets and newspapers, at least in the United States, were already facing financial difficulties. Subscriptions were down and all of that, and then COVID hit, and a lot of them no longer had health reporters or people with science background, science degrees in their newsrooms. And so, and this was a totally new disease, new pandemic that we knew nothing about at the end of 2019. And then suddenly in March, the world came to know it. And I think reporters were really struggling to provide accurate information to their viewers or to their readers. I mean, how is it in Germany and Pakistan? Like the professor just alluded to the fact that many of the newsrooms don't have people with science backgrounds or whatnot. Is that the case with Najia and Beenish? Is that what you saw as well? And how have outlets handled that?
Yeah, I guess we are fighting an invisible enemy. And as you're talking about a science degree to cover health beat, so not in my knowledge. I have never came across any journalist having a specifically science degree and working for the health beat. Maybe there could be one or two who are performing their duties as health reporters. We have health reporters in every news channel, but they are not subject experts. And COVID-19 has made the situation worse. Every reporter, whether he's working on political beat, whether he's covering business news, sports, or covering entertainment, they quickly switch to health coverage. Those who had no previous specialization, even you can't believe that every political analyst and program anchor, they became health expert. And that was the time, I would say, when we experienced this infodemic. There was a pandemic of disinformation. The journalists were being tested initially on how to report the outbreak and the impact of COVID-19, so they could be able to prevent, respond, and mitigate the impact of this pandemic through accurate reporting. In the absence of credible information, then people started sharing conspiracy theories through social media. Theories such as the virus would end soon as temperature rises to 30 Celsius. Or there were rumors like those diagnosed with the COVID-19 would be killed in hospital through toxic injections in order to reduce the spread of virus. So there were more, like I can tell you more and more about it. Like garlic is useful in the treatment of disease, or drinking hot water, or using a herb like sanamaki would kill the virus. So what I observed, viewers, readers, even media itself, they were relying on social media for accurate information, and the social media was full of misinformation. The entire world knew nothing about the virus, and the coverage in the media, I would say it was just experimental. We were just fighting with an enemy that was invisible, and we cannot defeat it. So science degree, I think that doesn't make any difference right now, because if we have scientific data, who is going to evaluate that data? That is the question. I think Altaf Saab has already described it very clearly. So we don't have health reporters who are perfect to cover health issues.
Thank you. And Beenish, was it similar in Germany that they didn't
So,
have
yeah,
subject experts?
yeah, I think I would go back to the topic of disinformation. What I experienced was that it was not easy to report on this pandemic, even from Germany, even from a country which has, very like a lot of science reporters who have expert health reporters and expert health experts. And there's a lot of scientific development also going on right now in Germany related to corona, to its vaccine, to other, to other research related to coronavirus. What happened was, just as Altaf Saab said, there was a lot of confusion when this corona crisis started. There were statements from WHO, there were statements from, for instance, in Germany, from Robert Koch Institute, and then there were statements and information coming from, from Pakistan, from India, from different countries. And in all of that, there were some politicians who were, just completely undermining this pandemic. So as a reporter or as a journalist, I think it was not very easy to report on accuracy, like to report accurately what's happening. And then there were certain tools, and then what do you do as a journalist when you're facing a situation like that? What DW did was that, because there was a lot of fake news, a lot of disinformation also, we really wanted to keep ourselves safe, and we all wanted to report authentically. So what we did, when we were taking a report from a news agency, we made sure that that report was at least reported by minimum of 2 news agencies. Only then we would pick up that story. But that's not the end. DW and other also news organizations in Germany did a lot of reporting on corona. And what DW did was, they did their own research-based reports. They spoke to scientists. They spoke to what, Robert Koch Institute was saying, an organization that, German government relies on for all the statistics, for all the information on pandemic. And with these sources, that you have some trust that if the scientist is saying something, he's credible, and if Robert Koch Institute has released a statement, it is credible. And then from there on, you incorporate all of these elements into your report. And then I think Deutsche Welle was able to stay away from a lot of disinformation. But I would say it was not very easy. But then we had some tools also, while we were reporting that, for instance, there's a matrix known as known unknowns matrix. So you put some information that you know, some information that you don't know, some information that you get from experts, and then some information that you can get from completely independent expert or something like that. And when you put your report or you construct your report in that kind of metrics, then you really try your best that you are not spreading fake information, because it's difficult. Sometimes some of the experts were confused. Even scientists were, saying different, completely different things. And I
Right.
still, yeah, it's been really difficult to report. And but you then follow your gut. You also follow all the procedures, and then you end up with a report that is not, spreading disinformation.
Wow, I think Beenish, you just gave us a crash course in how to counter disinformation. So I actually want to turn to Professor Khan and see, I mean, maybe he could invite Beenish to his university. I want to know, how are you teaching students to counter when they become journalists, they graduate and become journalists, how are you teaching them to counter disinformation? I think Beenish has already kind of outlined a perfect course for us, but if you could address that a little bit and what your university is doing, that would be great.
Yeah, universities courses move through bodies, but it's the mode of teaching that changes within different subjects. Uh, you know, using sources and fighting disinformation, the main thing is basically it's a question of ethics. So how do you report? So if you are following the right procedures, you will be able to report correctly. But here I must say that in the pandemic, if an organization has the luxury of waiting for a few hours to confirm information, that's easier. But most of the organizations in Pakistan, for example, and also around the globe, they work 24/7. And they have to repeat information that comes. People are waiting because in times of crisis, there is a lot of fear. And there were two very obvious emotions at work in the audience. One of those was being informed what's going on. And because of the social media, because of the globalization and the information explosion, as we call it, everybody knew everything. Like the pandemic 100 years before, people came to know even now that 1/3 of the people who died were from the subcontinent. We didn't know about that. But here during the pandemic, you really knew how many people got infected in Islamabad. For example, it was international news when Barakau was barricaded. So everybody knew. So, and the other emotion at work is how to get out of this situation, which has really locked us in our homes. So people were ready to believe everything that goes on social media. And the task of the journalists was basically how to get out of it, because social media, citizen journalism was giving you spot reports, and it was difficult. And a lot of people got involved. One of very famous strategist in the US, I forget the name of the researcher, she said the only way to counter fake news is to swarm the media with truth. Like you just keep pushing the truth. It's the same as Joseph Goebbels used to say. Like the repetition of truth also makes it easier for you to make people believe that the right thing is the right. But then there were these questions of presentation, how to present. Like the only credible source was the UN, basically, because they had all the data. And there is also this question of truth, for example. Like what we say scientific information is scientifically proven information. So there is an epistemological fallacy in when we say that we are reporting the truth. No, we are reporting information, but we are choosing the source of information. The source of information, the credible source of information was the WHO, the CDC, and our own government. Now, the problem here is that the WHO was being accused of doing many wrong things. CDC was fighting also its own fights within the country. And the government in Pakistan is not very popular, to say that people don't trust that. Journalists also try to avoid the government and get information. So that was, I think, the biggest challenge. And that's also a challenge for the future. As Najia, you said, you don't need to be to have a science degree. But the problem in Pakistan is that most of our journalists cannot deal with data. Like data is very boring. And the task of the journalist is take the data, make it interesting, and give it to the viewer or a reader or a listener. And that's something that these are the skills that we will focus on right now. Since we have a lot of lab work going on in our department, so that's something, how to present facts, how to analyze facts. And these are really important issues which were considered to be, okay, this is the future, but it's the present right now. You have to learn how to deal with data. You have to learn how to present data in a way that people believe it, choose sources and things like that.
Right. Thank you. All three of you have discussed the fact that oftentimes journalists were critical of the government response to COVID-19, or were countering some of the information that the government was putting out there. So that begs the question, has freedom of the press suffered during COVID-19? What are you seeing in Pakistan and in Germany in terms of freedom of the press? Are journalists skeptical of government motivations behind the information shared with the public? And why don't we start with Beenish? I want to hear what's going on in Germany in terms of that.
So very interesting things are happening. Germany was really appreciated by almost entire world in its COVID-19 response, how German government reacted to this pandemic. And it was very organized, very systematic. And when we look at Germany and compare it to other European countries, for instance, Italy and France, okay, there might be some element of luck, but I think German government there's a very good medical system in Germany. And some of the factors helped. Initially, a lot of young people contracted the virus, not very old people. So some of the factors help, but overall, there's a good medical infrastructure available in the country. They were very, very proactive. They immediately, when German government realized that pandemic is now at home, coronavirus at home, I remember when I used to go out for a walk every day, and the day when Angela Merkel announced that, this after Second World War, this is the biggest crisis or biggest challenge Germany is facing. And the next day, immediately after her statement, the next day I saw that, there was no one on the streets. Literally, so people really listened to what Merkel was saying, and her popularity actually also increased in the initial period of the pandemic. But now what's happening is, maybe you people must have heard about the Berlin protests. It was, I think, two weeks ago or a few days ago. And there were more than 30, there were thousands and thousands of people on streets, and they were not all the right wing, not just the, the extremists or the right wing people or the people who just think that, there is no virus. There were people from all political spectrum. And this is very challenging now for journalists also, and also, of course, for the government, because there is a fatigue and people are tired. But as journalists, it will always be our duty to continue to report. And also, what I have noticed that coronavirus or the news related to coronavirus is not sensational, or it's not hot news anymore. So people and news organizations, and especially online news organizations, benefited a lot because, there was lockdown, people were not working, and they were all the time online. So clicks, they really enjoyed a lot of traffic and a lot of growth, especially online news organizations. But now there's fatigue, and even if you do coronavirus story, it's people are not reading it. And as journalists and as news organizations, it's a big challenge, because pandemic or the virus is still there. It's still killing people. It's still affecting millions and millions of lives. And how we continue to report, but how do we report on a topic when public is not interested in it anymore and there is fatigue? And we have to find new ways, interesting ways. And it's a challenge now that how we continue to report the true gravity of this pandemic, because it's it's still deadly. It's still killing people. It's still affecting economies. But I'm afraid that there's a fatigue and also in media because it's not getting the same kind of traffic and same kind of response that it was getting when this pandemic started.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I hope I've answered you because I started talking and I forgot exactly what you asked. I hope I've answered.
Very helpful. It's very helpful. And I think now I'll turn to Najia and ask about freedom of the press here in Pakistan, especially given Pakistan's close relationship with China and the fact that COVID-19 originated in China. I'm curious, did that affect reporters' abilities to report freely on the pandemic?
In my opinion, that was not the priority of media at that time. As Beenish very clearly said, it was not a hot news because the origin of virus was reported as a fact in January when a hospital in Wuhan posted on social media that they are fighting a mysterious pneumonia. In the end of January, Wuhan was under lockdown. COVID-19 was declared as a public health emergency of global concern. So it was reported in Pakistan as a news story. But the important point is that the media and the government both were not much concerned about it at that time. So it took almost 2 months. The virus reached Pakistan on, I think, 26th of February. So 2 cases were recorded at that time, and both were the students who came back from Iran. So Turkhan border and Chaman border, and then mass religious gathering in Pakistan were the main concerns over COVID-19 spread. The origin of virus and the relationship of Pakistan or China government became an old news by that time. There is an interesting fact I would like to share. Recently, a Google Trend, I think, they issued a research on news stories. The report says that the average big news story lasts for around 7 days before the public moves to the next story or next crisis. So I think 2 months were enough for Pakistani media to move on to the next current story. The spread of virus became the main question and concern, not the origin of that virus. If we talk about how the virus coverage was done, and there was a freedom of expression issues also there. So PEMRA, the Pakistan Electronic Media Authority, regulatory authority, introduced a restrictive directives for reporting and coverage of COVID-19. It has some vague terms like media should avoid showing images and videos of health workers who are working in the field or working at their workplace, and restricting the coverage of acts of violence against health workers in their places. And also the directives urge media houses to develop their capacity to cover the pandemic by constituting special editorial boards to verify the authenticity, accuracy, and correctness of the information regarding any drug, if they are giving information about that, or any vaccine. So government has also set up a committee to prepare new legal framework to tackle coronavirus related misinformation. But there are rights activists. They fear that the new laws can be used to choke freedom of speech. So, there is another aspect. If we talk about social media platforms, because most of the information regarding coronavirus was spreading on social media platforms such as Facebook. So they are already working with the Pakistani government to limit COVID-19 disinformation.
Thank you so much. I think now I'll turn to some of the questions that are coming in. And one of them is something I wanted to ask anyhow, and that is, what's the future of media here in Pakistan and in Germany and other places, given that COVID is not ending anytime soon? I mean, it's here to stay for at least a while, and it looks like some of us may be encountering a second wave now. And a lot of media outlets are facing financial challenges and whatnot. And all of you talked about the role of social media and how social media, there's a lot of disinformation spreading on social media, but a lot of people are turning to social media for information and whatnot. What's the future of media here? Is the importance of social media growing and what's the future of broadcast news stations and newspapers and whatnot. I will first turn to Professor Khan on this one.
Thank you. Social media has become, even before COVID-19, one of the more trusted source of information by most of us. The reason is interactivity, it's proactive. It's a proactive platform. You can communicate and you can get a lot of information. And because of the digital gadgets, you can even answer all the 5 W's and 1 H that we used to teach students to do good journalism. And you can just file a report which is as accurate as any organization could do that. Even before COVID, there was this debate about what should journalists do, because the way we write stories like news is no more valid, because these are already on social media, like there are comments. So there were suggestions that the future of journalism is in analysis. So we won't be having any reporters in the sense of reporting spot news, which brings us to the next level, which was already under debate, is that journalism, solution journalism, for example. Like you don't simply report. Like earlier we used to teach students and also journalists used to say that their job is to report. Now people say, okay, the report is already there. You have a 15-second video and it shows it all. These are your 5 W's. This is the 1 H. You have it all. Tell us what to do. And here comes the idea of solution journalism, where you bring in different opinions and facts, and then you analyze a situation. Sometimes you bring in many similar incidences and you try to make sense of it. You try to make local sense of it. In the case of the pandemic, we are introduced to a global journalism, basically. So we are into global journalism. When you are reporting from Lahore, for example, and there is something happening in New York, or in Zimbabwe, or in Kenya, or in Brazil, you include that in the story. That's the advantage of media explosion, that you have information about that, and you try to give your audience kind of a news which is local and global at the same time. Now, the difference between international journalism and national or local journalism has also changed. Like every story is national and every story is international. When you mention COVID cases in the UK, for example, while you are talking about how Pakistan survived, it's a miracle that Pakistan survived. Nobody knows. The government is taking credit for its smart lockdowns. People know that there were no lockdowns at all, but things like that. So we see a new journalism which is global and it's local at the same time, and I think that is going to be the future. But the role of social media will enhance. Now, what I see as the biggest challenge in the future is how to survive, because Facebook will take all your ads. Like, where will you get advertisement? Even government will start giving ads to Mark Zuckerberg. So he's also considered to be the new global government. Like, people say that Facebook is the global government. So there are financial issues and also issues of capacity. We have to really reinvent ourselves as journalists and also as journalism education institutions to survive as a profession. Now, the last word is that we should not think that social media will replace mainstream journalism, because if mainstream journalism dies, one of the very important pillars of democracy also dies with it, which will really adversely affect democratic processes in established democracies and also struggling democracies like ours. Like, it's very important that we learn how to live with social media and how to remain mainstream. It has nothing to do with anything. It has nothing against the social media, but it's important that in a democratic dispensation, you have media.
Thank you. Najia, we have another question about how can journalists encourage readers or viewers to cooperate with the SOPs, like social distancing or wearing masks and whatnot? What can journalists do to assist with that?
I think journalists are doing their work, and they are promoting SOPs because whenever you see any journalist on screen, they are wearing masks and they are telling people to use SOPs. And when it is not only journalists' responsibility, the media organizations, they also trying to implement those SOPs, the places where journalists are working. So when you are going to adopt those SOPs, then you can tell other people, or you can tell your audience to adopt those SOPs. So I think media has done an amazing job because still whenever there is a press conference or they are covering any public gathering, they try to convince their audience to implement those SOPs, whether they are citizens or they are other organizations. For example, if they are going to cover any event of any corporate sector, or if it is an event from the government institutions. So there is coverage related to the SOPs, whether that organization is using the SOPs or not. So they raise questions, they report if there is any lack of responsibility. I think media has done its job, because media can only tell people how you can adopt those SOPs and you can save your life, because accurate information saves lives. So it's up to the government and other institutions to take their part. They have to take the responsibility to show show their work or their attitude towards the coronavirus cases or coronavirus situation, because only media cannot convince the public to go for the SOPs. It's also government's responsibility, and government has to take this serious.
Great, thank you for that. I want to say to our viewers, thank you for tuning in today, and keep sending the questions. I'm trying to ask as many as possible of our panelists, so keep sending them in and I'll keep trying to ask them. We have two female panelists, and so viewers want to know if COVID-19 has had a disproportionate impact on female journalists. Would either of you want to start to address that?
Beenish?
Okay, maybe I can start.
Okay.
I think a good aspect that can come out from this situation is that we should take advantage of female journalists. We should take advantage of their sensitivities. We should take advantage of how a woman sees a thing. And it's not that a woman journalist is better than a male journalist. It's just that we think differently in certain terms. So and especially when it comes to situation where families are affected, where there was a lot of increase of domestic violence because of lockdown. We need more female journalists who can report on such sensitive issues, because I was also reading a report by UN, and it said that almost 20 years of work that was done to balance or on gender balance, it has been lost during this pandemic. And we need that voices. We need more female journalists who can pick these kind of stories from this pandemic, because I didn't see this story reported at massive level, but there were so many stories because of lockdown, how women were suffering, how women were, or children were, they did not have any choice but to stay with the abuser, if in certain situations. And so I don't think it has affected that, now there are the number of female journalists has reduced because of pandemic. I don't see anything like that, but the good aspect is that maybe I hope news organizations can look at these points and have more female journalists, because they can report things differently, and we should appreciate that.
Thank you for that comment. I really appreciate it. And Najia, there were like 165 female journalists who submitted a petition to the government here in Pakistan protesting against the online harassment that they suffered. And some of that harassment was due to their coverage of COVID-19, is my understanding. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. And by the way, I am one of them. So women journalists have experienced increased gender inequalities during this period. And let me tell you that only less than 5% of journalists in Pakistan, they are women who are facing substantial risks and hurdles, and online threats of gender-based violence, rape, or harassment, releasing personal details of women journalists who are working they're just doing their duties. So online bullying also seeks to discredit and intimidate women, referring to them as peddlers of fake news, or they are called an enemy of people. So it has, I think, become more easier for the people to malign and harass women in media, and they are targeted for their work. The statement you are talking about, basically a joint statement. It was issued from women journalists, highlighting the prevailing trend of continued digital violence from supporters of all political parties, and not only political parties, from different public and state institutions. So now we, the women who are working in Pakistani media, we are together to fight, and these are the voices. They are growing louder and stronger. Uh, uh, but we need support, and we have to support those voices. We are supporting each other. We are trying to make spaces for each other, because we already have a few women in Pakistani media, and it is not a path that is encouraged. But I strongly believe that with digital media, the gender inequalities will be reduced day by day. And we are working for that, because we need more women in newsrooms. We need more women in the field. So we can we can speak on behalf of women. We can work for them, and we can deal all the issues related to gender in the media.
Yeah, and maybe I could just add wonderful points, Najia. And I also have worked in Pakistan as a journalist for maybe 6-7 years, and I also feel that we don't have women journalists at decision-making positions. Right. And this is a big problem, and because when all men are there on the management positions and decision makers, then how much sensitivity do they have for female journalists? And it's harassment is this cyberbullying is a really big issue, and and it's really commendable that wonderfully Pakistani female journalists came together and they issued a statement, and at least something has happened, and we really hope that something will come out of it. But from very basic facilities such as having a clean toilet for women journalists in newsrooms to giving them basic facilities, a lot needs to be done. And I really hope that when the movement that women journalists in Pakistan have started will ultimately lead to more facilities, a better working environment for women journalists.
Yeah, and you're talking about clean washrooms or toilets, but I would say they need separate toilets, because yes, in many organizations, there is no separate toilet for women journalists.
Wow, thank you for the comments. I should probably also tell our viewers who probably noticed that Professor Khan left us that it wasn't because he was uncomfortable with this discussion of gender issues. It was because he had to attend an academic committee meeting, so he had to leave a few minutes early. And looking at the time now, we only have about 5 minutes left. So I think what I'll do is just ask Najia and Beenish if they have any last comments on COVID and its impact on journalism. Najia, you want to start?
COVID-19 has made the situation worse with business closed, even a small scale advertisements, including lifelines from the government advertisements. So the media in Pakistan need to overcome the issue of revenue generation. And worldwide, the media industry we saw no longer relies on adverts for funding, but is pushing readers towards subscription and membership. But we don't have membership or subscription models in Pakistan. Our local media outlets, they are not ready to accept the reality that the traditional modes of business have become obsolete. So they have to adopt the new models. We don't have sustainable subscription models here. So most of the content is free, online content. So no paywalls. Still media is relying on corporate sector or government advertisement. So we have to find ways to introduce some new models. And I think you were talking about the future of journalism. The future of journalism is audio-centric stories, audio-centric journalism, more news products, and different and new business models for media.
Great, thank you for that comment. Before I turn to Beenish, I'm going to say that your comment about business models was interesting, because another point I wanted to raise today was that a lot of the outlets in the U.S. with the online papers and whatnot actually removed paywalls so that people could access COVID-19 information, because they saw that as vital and you know, and very vital information to get out to the public. So they removed those paywalls. But yes, the business model thing is probably something that needs to be re-examined by a lot of outlets worldwide. Beenish, turning to you, any last comments?
I would like to urge and share this advice with journalists who would watch this webinar. A lot of my female or male Pakistani journalists. Continue to improve your craft. Continue to work on inspiring stories. Continue to work on constructive journalism. As Mr. Altaf had said, we have to provide solutions now. There's a lot of negativity, and this journalism will, at least this journalism of just reporting the news, I don't see it as the future. Constructive journalism or solution journalism is the future, and more journalists should try to incorporate this element into their stories, where when they discuss a problem, they also provide a solution, or they also at least suggest a solution. Continue to work on your craft. Continue to look for stories, look for inspiring stories and human stories that can have an impact. Because information, there's a lot of information, but stories can make an impact, not in the information. So we need more and more impactful stories, and this is what I also as a journalist continue to strive for, and I hope we see more of it happening.
Thank you for those comments. I really want to thank all of our viewers who tuned in today. And thank you so much to our two wonderful panelists. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us online here and to talk to a lot of our alumni today. I think we all learned a great deal. I know I did. You could see me scribbling notes and whatnot, because I'm still fairly new to Pakistan and I've never worked as a journalist before. So this was all very educational for me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Heather, for having us.
Okay, thank you so much.